The arena floor drank blood like a thirsting god. Thomas Rell knelt in its center unarmed, while billions watched through quantum feeds, waiting for the slaughter. Above him, Tekor descended, 14 years of engineered death, claws that had torn through starships, eyes that had never known mercy. The crowd's roar died to whispers as the beast landed, its massive form casting shadows across the human's bowed head. This was, he entered the arena unarmed. Then the war beast offered its claws, the moment when the universe held its breath. Thomas did not look up, did not beg, did not run. He simply waited, and in that waiting, something ancient stirred in the beast's genetically perfect heart, subscribed to witness the moment that shattered the stars themselves. The transport shuddered as it broke through Bloodspire's atmospheric shield, and Thomas Rell felt the weight of 1 billion eyes settling on his shoulders like lead. Through the reinforced viewport, the Colosseum stretched endlessly below, a metallic cancer that had consumed half the planet, its surface pocked with viewing platforms that glittered like scales on some cosmic serpent. The quantum feeds were already broadcasting his approach, he knew, streaming his image to every corner of the galaxy where beings gathered to watch death dressed as entertainment. His hands, shackled in neural dampeners, trembled not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. The guards flanking him wore the crimson of the Ashkar Syndicate, their faces hidden behind masks that reflected his own pale features back at him like a prophecy of doom. The arena floor rushed up to meet them, a perfect circle of black sand that had been consecrated with the blood of 10,000 warriors. Thomas had read the statistics during his 3-day journey from the prison moon. Gladiators from every species, war machines from every corner of known space, all reduced to stains on this unholy ground. The transport's engines screamed as they reversed thrust, kicking up clouds of that dark sand, and through the swirling particles he could see the massive viewing screens that ringed the arena's upper tiers. His own face stared back at him from those screens, magnified 1,000-fold, every line of exhaustion and resignation broadcast to audiences who had paid fortunes to witness his destruction. The irony was not lost on him. Thomas Rell, the peacekeeper who had spent 15 years preventing wars, now about to become the centerpiece of the galaxy's most violent spectacle. The transport's bay doors hissed open, and the sound hit him like a physical blow. The roar of countless voices, the thunder of stamping feet, the electronic wail of betting systems processing millions of wagers on his survival time. The guards prodded him forward with shock sticks, their movements mechanical, professional, devoid of the sadistic pleasure he had expected. They were simply doing their job, delivering meat to the grinder, and their indifference somehow made the moment more terrible than any cruelty could have. As his feet touched the arena sand, Thomas felt the neural dampeners disengage with a soft click, returning sensation to his limbs just in time for him to feel every grain of sand, every vibration from the crowd, every molecule of air that tasted of old blood and fresh terror. The guards retreated without ceremony, their part in this ritual complete, leaving him alone in the center of a space so vast that the far walls seemed to curve with the planet's horizon. Above him, the arena's dome stretched like a cathedral ceiling made of transparent aluminum, and beyond that, the stars watched with cold indifference. Thomas had always found comfort in those stars during his years as a peacekeeper, had navigated by them through the silent wars that never made the history books, had sworn oaths under their light to protect the innocent and preserve life wherever possible. Now they seemed like distant judges, assembled to witness his final failure, his ultimate inability to prevent violence, even his own destruction. The crowd's noise began to organize itself into chants, words in a dozen languages, all meaning the same thing: death, blood, entertainment. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the meditation techniques that had sustained him through the worst moments of his career. But the sound was too overwhelming, too immediate, too hungry. When he opened his eyes again, the arena's central platform was rising from beneath the sand, carrying with it the ceremonial weapons rack that tradition demanded be offered to every gladiator. Swords from 100 worlds gleamed under the artificial suns that blazed from the dome's apex, each blade sharp enough to cut through starship hull, each handle worn smooth by the grip of dying hands. The platform stopped with a mechanical thud just 10 feet away, close enough that he could see his reflection fractured across the polished metal surfaces, close enough that the crowd's anticipation became a living thing that pressed against his skin like heat from a forge. The announcer's voice boomed from speakers embedded in the arena walls, speaking in the trade tongue that every sentient being could understand, reciting his crimes: sedition, treason, interference with lawful military operations, each word a nail in the coffin of his former life. But Thomas Rell did not move toward the weapons. Instead, he sank to his knees in the black sand, his hands open and empty at his sides, his head bowed not in defeat, but in the same posture he had assumed countless times before altars on a dozen worlds, seeking guidance from whatever gods might listen to the prayers of a man who had seen too much war. The crowd's roar faltered, confusion rippling through the stands like wind through wheat, and in that moment of uncertainty, the arena's true purpose revealed itself, not entertainment, but a machine for transforming hope into despair, courage into cowardice, life into death. He would not feed that machine. He would not take up arms against another living being, not even to save his own life, not even here, not even now. The silence that followed Thomas's refusal to arm himself was not empty, but pregnant with possibility, heavy with the weight of 1 billion held breaths across the galaxy. In the VIP boxes that ringed the arena's upper tiers, crime lords and planetary governors leaned forward in their seats, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they tried to process what they were witnessing. This was not how gladiatorial combat worked. There were rules, traditions, expectations built over centuries of bloodshed, and the human kneeling in the sand was violating every one of them simply by existing in a state of peaceful surrender. The betting systems, confused by the lack of weapon selection, began flashing error messages that cascaded across the arena's information displays like digital tears. Even the automated camera drones seemed uncertain, their lenses focusing and refocusing on Thomas as if trying to understand what story they were supposed to tell. High above the arena floor, in the beast pens that honeycombed the Colosseum's superstructure, Tekor stirred in its containment cell. 14 years of genetic engineering had created something that was no longer quite animal, but not yet fully sentient. A perfect fusion of predatory instinct and tactical intelligence, designed by the hegemony's war scientists to be the ultimate ground assault weapon. Its body was a masterpiece of biological warfare, 8 feet of corded muscle and reinforced bone, covered in scales that could deflect plasma fire and tipped with claws that could punch through battle armor like paper. The neural implants that controlled its aggression were already flooding its system with combat stimulants, preparing it for the hunt. But something was different this time. The usual pre-combat rage was slow to build, as if some deeper part of its consciousness was questioning the commands being fed into its brain. The transport cage began its descent through the arena's central shaft, carrying Tekor toward its appointment with death. Either its own or its opponent's, the distinction had never mattered before. Through the cage's reinforced bars, it could see the human below, motionless in the sand, and the sight-triggered responses that its creators had never intended. The genetic memory of its base species, a pack hunter from the Rimworlds, carried instincts about prey behavior that the engineers had tried to suppress but never fully eliminated. Prey that did not run, did not fight, did not show fear. Such prey was either diseased, protecting young, or preparing to die for something greater than itself. The beast's enhanced intellect, designed to make it a more effective killer, began processing these possibilities with a thoroughness that its handlers would have found alarming. As the cage descended, Takor's enhanced senses began cataloging everything about its intended victim. The human's scent carried no trace of the adrenaline that usually marked combat readiness, no pheromones of aggression or territorial challenge. Instead, there was something else, a chemical signature that the beast's genetic memory associated with the pack leaders of its ancestral species, the ones who would place themselves between danger and the young, who would face death without flinching to protect something precious. The neural implants pulsed harder, trying to override these inconvenient instincts with pure killing rage. But the beast's consciousness was evolving faster than its creators had anticipated. Each pulse of artificial aggression was met by a deeper questioning, a growing awareness that it had choices beyond the simple binary of kill or be killed. The cage reached the arena floor with a thunderous impact that sent tremors through the sand, and the crowd's roar returned with renewed intensity as they anticipated the slaughter to come. The release mechanism engaged with a series of mechanical clicks that echoed across the arena like the cocking of some enormous weapon, and the cage door swung open with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Takor emerged slowly, its massive form unfolding from the transport like some primordial nightmare given flesh, its claws leaving deep furrows in the sand as it tested its footing. The arena's lighting systems automatically adjusted to highlight the beast's most terrifying features: the ridge of bone spikes along its spine, the phosphorescent patterns that marked its kill zones, the eyes that glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence wedded to perfect lethality. But as Takor approached the kneeling human, something unprecedented happened in its enhanced neural pathways. The killing protocols that should have activated automatically remained dormant, held in check by a growing curiosity that its creators had never anticipated. The human had not moved, had not even looked up, and this absence of normal prey behavior triggered deeper subroutines in the beast's consciousness, ancient pack instincts that recognized submission not as weakness but as a form of communication. The crowd's noise faded to a distant roar as Takor's world narrowed to the figure before it, and for the first time in its engineered existence, the beast found itself capable of choice. The neural implants screamed their commands, flooding its system with artificial rage. But something deeper and more fundamental was awakening, something that its creators had tried to eliminate but had only managed to bury. Takor circled the kneeling human with the fluid grace of a predator assessing its prey, but each step brought new confusion rather than clarity. The beast's enhanced senses detected no deception in the human's posture, no hidden weapons, no coiled tension waiting to spring into action, only a profound stillness that seemed to radiate outward like ripples in a pond. The arena's automated systems tracked every movement, feeding real-time biometric data to the betting networks, but the readings made no sense to the algorithms designed to predict combat outcomes. The human's heart rate was elevated but steady, his breathing deep and controlled, his brain activity showing patterns associated with meditation rather than mortal terror. The beast's own vital signs were equally confusing. Aggression markers that should have been spiking remained at baseline levels, while neural pathways associated with curiosity and social bonding showed unprecedented activity. In the VIP boxes, the Ashkar Syndicate's executives began exchanging worried glances as their carefully orchestrated spectacle devolved into something they had never seen before. Gladiatorial combat was a science to them, a precisely calibrated entertainment product designed to deliver maximum emotional impact to their audiences. But the variables in the arena below were operating outside all known parameters. The human's refusal to fight was unprecedented enough, but the beast's hesitation was actively dangerous. Takor represented millions of credits in genetic engineering and neural conditioning, a prototype weapon that dozens of military contractors were watching with keen interest. If the creature failed to perform as designed, if it showed even a moment's weakness or uncertainty, the implications would ripple through defense contracts across the galaxy. Tekor completed its circle and came to rest directly in front of Tomas, its massive head lowering until it was mere inches from the human's bowed skull. The beast's breath was hot against Tomas's skin, carrying the scent of the raw meat that comprised its diet and the metallic tang of the neural implants that controlled its behavior. For a moment that stretched into eternity, predator and prey existed in a bubble of perfect stillness while the universe held its breath around them. The crowd's noise had faded to a whisper, as if even the bloodthirsty masses sensed that they were witnessing something that transcended their understanding of violence and entertainment. The beast's claws, each one capable of rending steel, rested gently in the sand beside the human's knees, close enough to kill, but positioned with an almost ceremonial precision. The neural implants in Tekor's skull pulsed with increasing desperation, flooding the beast's system with combat stimulants and aggression enhancers. But the creature's consciousness had moved beyond the reach of such crude manipulations. Deep in its genetically modified brain, pathways that its creators thought they had eliminated were blazing to life, connecting the beast to instincts that predated civilization itself. The recognition of submission as a form of trust, the understanding that some prey chose death not from weakness but from strength. The human, before it carried no weapons, showed no fear, offered no challenge, and in that absence of threat, Tekor found something its creators had never intended it to discover, the possibility of choice. Slowly, with movements that seemed to surprise even itself, Tekor began to lower its massive form toward the sand. The crowd's whisper died completely as the beast's belly touched the ground, its powerful limbs folding beneath it in a posture that mirrored the human's kneeling position. The arena's automated cameras zoomed in frantically, trying to capture every detail of this unprecedented moment, while the betting systems crashed completely, unable to process odds for an outcome that had never been programmed into their databases. The beast's head came to rest on the sand between its forepaws, its glowing eyes fixed on the human's face with an intensity that spoke of recognition rather than predation. In that moment of perfect stillness, something passed between human and beast that transcended language, species, and the artificial barriers that civilization had erected between predator and prey. Thomas felt the weight of the creature's gaze like a physical presence, warm and questioning, and somehow familiar, as if he were looking into the eyes of a lost child rather than an engineered weapon. The beast's breathing synchronized with his own, deep and steady and peaceful, and in that shared rhythm, both beings found something they had been searching for without knowing it, the recognition that mercy was not weakness, but the highest form of strength. That choosing not to kill was the most profound victory of all. The silence in the arena had become a living thing, pressing against the dome like the held breath of gods. And in that crystalline moment, Tekor made a choice that would echo across the stars for generations to come. With movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed by destiny itself, the beast began to extend its right forepaw toward the kneeling human. Claws that had torn through starship hulls now offered like gifts to a king. The gesture was impossibly gentle for a creature designed for war, each talon placed with the precision of a surgeon, the deadly points coming to rest in the sand just inches from Thomas's open palms. The arena's quantum cameras captured every microsecond of the movement, broadcasting the image to billions of viewers who watched in stunned silence as their understanding of violence and power crumbled before their eyes. Thomas felt the warmth radiating from the beast's massive paw, could smell the ozone scent of the neural implants that were even now screaming their futile commands into Tekor's consciousness, could hear the almost inaudible whine of servos as the creature fought against its own programming to maintain this impossible gesture of surrender. When he finally raised his head to meet the beast's gaze, he saw intelligence there. Not the cold calculation of a weapon, but the warm recognition of a soul discovering itself for the first time. The beast's eyes, which had been engineered to strike terror into the hearts of enemies, now held something that its creators had tried to eliminate but could never truly destroy. The capacity for wonder, for choice, for the kind of love that transcends species and circumstance. The crowd's silence shattered like glass as the implications of what they were witnessing began to penetrate their consciousness. In the cheap seats, laborers and miners who had saved for months to afford arena tickets found themselves weeping without understanding why. In the VIP boxes, crime lords and planetary governors sat frozen in their chairs, their carefully constructed worldviews cracking like ice in spring. The betting systems, overwhelmed by the impossibility of calculating odds for an outcome that had never existed before, began displaying error messages in languages that hadn't been spoken for centuries. Even the arena's automated systems seemed confused, their targeting algorithms unable to lock onto either combatant because neither was displaying the aggressive postures that triggered their threat assessment protocols. High above the arena floor, in the control room where the syndicate's executives monitored their investment, emergency meetings were being called and fortunes were being lost with each passing second. The gladiatorial industry was built on the fundamental assumption that violence was inevitable, that given the choice between killing and dying, every sentient being would choose to kill. But the human and the beast below were proving that assumption wrong, demonstrating that there were forms of courage that transcended survival, types of strength that had nothing to do with the ability to destroy. The implications rippled outward through the galaxy's power structures like cracks in a dam, threatening to bring down institutions that had stood for millennia. Takor's offering hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm, and Thomas understood that this moment would define not just his own fate, but the future of every being who had ever been forced to choose between violence and death. The beast's claws gleamed in the arena's artificial sunlight, beautiful and terrible, and freely given, and in their reflection, he could see the faces of every person he had tried to save during his years as a peacekeeper, every life he had preserved through the simple act of refusing to take up arms against another living being. The crowd's noise was returning now, but it was different, confused, uncertain, touched with something that might have been awe. As Thomas reached out to touch the offered claws, his fingers trembling not with fear, but with the magnitude of what was being born in this moment, he felt the weight of history shifting around them, like tectonic plates finding new alignment. The beast's eyes never left his face, and in their depths he saw the reflection of his own choice, to kneel rather than fight, to trust rather than fear, to believe that mercy was stronger than any weapon ever forged. The arena's sand, which had drunk the blood of 10,000 warriors, now bore witness to something unprecedented. The moment when two beings chose love over violence, trust over fear, and in doing so, changed the fundamental nature of what it meant to be alive in a universe that had forgotten the meaning of peace. The silence that had fallen over Bloodspire Colosseum stretched beyond the arena walls, beyond the orbital platform, beyond the gravitational pull of Ashkar Prime itself. In viewing chambers across 17 star systems, beings who had gathered to witness another routine execution found themselves staring at screens that showed something their minds struggled to process. The human still knelt in the sand, his hand resting gently on Takor's massive head, while the warbeast remained motionless, its claws buried in the arena floor like an offering to some forgotten god. The moment stretched, elastic and infinite, as if the universe itself had paused to witness this impossible communion between predator and prey, between the engineered and the natural, between war and peace. In the Imperial viewing box, Chancellor Vextar's 4 eyes had narrowed to slits, his chitinous fingers drumming against the armrest of his throne with increasing agitation. The Kethamori leader had built his empire on the certainty of violence, on the predictable nature of fear and dominance. His war beasts were instruments of terror, bred and conditioned to kill without hesitation, their neural pathways carved deep with the imperative to destroy. Yet here, before billions of witnesses, his most prized creation knelt like a supplicant before a human who should have been nothing more than scattered flesh and bone by now. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked together in a rhythm that his advisors recognized as barely contained fury, the sound echoing through the viewing chamber like the ticking of a bomb about to explode. Across the galaxy, in the underground fighting pits of Zerion 7, hardened criminals and slavers watched their illegal feeds with expressions of bewilderment and growing unease. These were beings who had built their lives on the commerce of suffering, who traded in flesh and fear with the casual indifference of merchants selling grain. They understood the language of violence, spoke it fluently, had made it their currency and their creed. But what they witnessed now was a dialect they had never learned, a grammar of compassion that rendered their entire worldview suddenly, terrifyingly obsolete. In the smoky depths of the Crimson Nebula's most notorious pleasure station, a Vorthak crime lord slowly lowered his drink, his scaled hand trembling almost imperceptibly as he watched the human's fingers stroke the war beast's hide with the tenderness of a parent comforting a frightened child. The arena's medical bay had erupted into chaos as Dr. Yenna Solis fought her way through crowds of confused technicians and bewildered officials, her scanner still clutched in her hand like a talisman against the impossible. The readings she had taken defied every principle of xenobiology she had studied, every law of neural conditioning that governed the behavior of engineered organisms. Takor's brain patterns showed none of the aggressive spikes that should have been flooding its system, none of the chemical cascades that preceded a kill. Instead, the warbeast's neural activity resembled something she had only seen in domesticated animals during moments of profound contentment, a state of being that should have been genetically impossible for a creature bred for nothing but slaughter. She pushed through the crowd, desperate to reach the arena floor, to take more readings, to understand how a human's simple act of surrender had rewritten the fundamental programming of the galaxy's most feared predator. In the depths of the Colosseum's holding cells, other war beasts began to pace restlessly in their containment units, their enhanced senses picking up something that their handlers couldn't detect. The creatures that had been bred to be living weapons, their minds shaped by genetic manipulation and neural conditioning, seemed to respond to some invisible signal emanating from the arena above. Their movements became less aggressive, more curious, as if some long-dormant instinct was stirring within their engineered consciousness. The handlers, veteran beast masters who had worked with these creatures for decades, found themselves backing away from the containment fields, their confidence shaken by the sudden change in their charge's behavior. One by one, the war beasts turned their massive heads toward the ceiling, toward the arena where their brother knelt in submission before a human who had offered nothing but his own vulnerability. The moment stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity as the galaxy watched and waited for someone, anyone, to break the spell that had fallen over Bloodspire Colosseum. But Thomas remained kneeling, his breathing steady and calm, his hand continuing its gentle rhythm against Takor's hide, while the war beast seemed to have found a peace that its creators had never intended it to know. The sand beneath them had grown warm with their shared presence, and in that warmth, something new was being born. Not just a friendship between two unlikely beings, but a possibility that would ripple outward through the stars, challenging every assumption about the nature of power, the meaning of strength, and the transformative force of mercy in a universe that had forgotten how to be gentle. The first crack in the Chancellor's composure came as a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within his armored chest, a sound that made his advisors step back in instinctive fear. Vexitar rose from his throne with the fluid grace of a predator, his forearms spreading wide as if to encompass the entirety of his crumbling authority, his eyes fixed on the impossible scene unfolding in the arena below. The human and the war beast remained locked in their peaceful tableau, a living contradiction to everything the Kethmori Empire had built its power upon, and with each passing moment, the Chancellor could feel the foundations of his rule shifting beneath his feet like sand in a cosmic storm. His voice, when it finally came, was a harsh rasp that cut through the silence of the viewing chamber like a blade through silk, carrying with it the weight of absolute command and barely restrained fury. "Activate the neural override," he commanded, his words falling like hammer blows in the suddenly tense atmosphere of the Imperial box. "Force the beast to complete its function." In this aberration, the technicians around him scrambled to comply, their fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as they attempted to access Tekor's neural implants, the microscopic devices that should have given them absolute control over the war beast's behavior. But as the override signals pulsed through the arena's transmission arrays, something unprecedented happened. The commands simply dissolved, absorbed and neutralized by some force that the engineers couldn't identify or understand. Tekor's massive form didn't even twitch in response to the neural bombardment, remaining as still and peaceful as a mountain weathering a gentle breeze. In the arena, Thomas felt the change in the air around them, a subtle shift in the electromagnetic field that made his skin tingle with an energy he couldn't quite identify. He had spent enough time around military technology to recognize the signature of neural manipulation devices, had seen what they could do to both human and alien minds during his years as a peacekeeper. But as he knelt there with his hand on Tekor's head, he sensed something extraordinary happening. The war beast was actively resisting the override commands, its consciousness somehow shielding itself from the technological intrusion that should have been irresistible. The creature's breathing remained deep and steady, its massive body radiating a calm that seemed to create a bubble of serenity in the midst of the Colosseum's chaos. And Thomas realized that he was witnessing something that would change everything he thought he knew about the nature of free will and the power of choice. The failure of the neural override sent shockwaves through the Imperial viewing box, where Chancellor Vextar's advisors exchanged glances of barely concealed panic. These were beings who had built their careers on the predictable nature of violence, who had risen to power by understanding and manipulating the mechanisms of fear and control that held the Empire together. The war beasts were supposed to be the ultimate expression of that control, living weapons that could be deployed with the certainty of a fired projectile, their every action predetermined by genetic programming and technological enhancement. But now, as they watched Tekor ignore commands that should have been as irresistible as gravity itself, they began to understand that they were witnessing the birth of something that could unravel everything they had worked to build, the emergence of true choice in a creature that was never supposed to possess it. Across the galaxy, the implications of what was happening began to ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped into still water. In the slave markets of the Outer Rim, where sentient beings were bought and sold like commodities, traders found themselves staring at their merchandise with new eyes, wondering if the neural conditioning that kept their products compliant might be less absolute than they had believed. On the prison worlds where political dissidents were held in neural stasis, wardens began to question whether their control systems were as foolproof as they had assumed. The image of Tekor kneeling peacefully beside the human had become more than just an entertainment anomaly. It had become a symbol of resistance, a proof that even the most thoroughly conditioned mind could choose a different path when offered the right catalyst. In the depths of the Colosseum, Dr. Solis finally reached the arena floor, her scanner held before her like a shield against the impossible. The readings she was getting defied every principle of neuroscience she had ever studied, showing brain patterns in Tekor that resembled nothing so much as a mind in the process of awakening from a long, dreamless sleep. The war beast's neural activity was reorganizing itself in real time, creating new pathways and connections that bypassed the conditioning protocols entirely, as if the creature's consciousness was actively rewriting its own programming. She approached the peaceful pair with trembling steps, her scientific mind reeling at the implications of what she was witnessing, knowing that she was documenting the moment when the galaxy's understanding of consciousness, free will, and the nature of choice would be forever changed by the simple act of one human choosing mercy over violence. The Chancellor's rage had crystallized into something far more dangerous than mere anger, a cold, calculating fury that transformed him from a ruler into something approaching a force of nature. His forearms moved with mechanical precision as he activated emergency protocols that hadn't been used since the Empire's founding wars, his voice cutting through the chaos of the viewing chamber with the authority of absolute power pushed to its breaking point. The holographic displays around him flickered to life, showing the positions of Imperial warships throughout the system, their weapons arrays powering up in response to his commands, while targeting computers began to lock onto the Colosseum itself. If he couldn't control the narrative through the war beast's compliance, then he would end it through the simple expedient of erasing both the human and the creature from existence, along with any witnesses who might spread word of what they had seen. "Prepare orbital bombardment," he commanded, his words falling like death sentences in the suddenly silent chamber. "Target the arena floor. Eliminate all evidence of this malfunction." The weapons officers hesitated for a fraction of a second, their training warring with the magnitude of what they were being asked to do. The Colosseum held not just the human and the war beast, but thousands of Imperial citizens, dignitaries from allied worlds, and enough political figures to destabilize half the galaxy if they were killed in what would inevitably be seen as an act of desperate tyranny. But the Chancellor's eyes held no room for argument. No space for mercy or political calculation, only the burning need to preserve the illusion of control that kept his empire from collapsing into chaos. In the arena, Thomas felt the change in the atmosphere before he saw the targeting lasers beginning to paint the sand around them, with crimson dots of impending death. His years as a peacekeeper had taught him to read the signs of escalating violence, to recognize the moment when diplomacy gave way to the brutal calculus of force, and he knew with absolute certainty that they had perhaps minutes before the Chancellor's desperation transformed into lethal action. But instead of fear, he felt only a deep sadness for the ruler who would choose to destroy rather than accept the possibility of change, who would murder thousands to preserve the fiction that mercy was weakness and that peace was impossible. He looked down at Tekor, whose massive eyes had opened to meet his gaze, and in those alien depths he saw an intelligence that was fully awake now, fully aware of what was coming and what it meant. The war beast rose slowly to its feet, its movements fluid and graceful despite its enormous size, and for a moment the watching galaxy held its breath, expecting the creature to finally fulfill its programming and tear the human apart in a final display of engineered savagery. But instead, Tekor positioned itself between Thomas and the targeting lasers, its massive form serving as a living shield, its claws extended not in aggression, but in protection. The gesture was so clearly deliberate, so obviously an act of conscious choice rather than programmed behavior, that even the most skeptical observers could no longer deny what they were witnessing, the birth of free will in a creature that had been designed to be nothing more than a weapon, the emergence of love in a mind that had been shaped for nothing but hatred. The Imperial warships had achieved firing position, their massive cannons trained on the Colosseum with the precision of surgical instruments, when something unprecedented began to happen throughout the galaxy. On worlds where the broadcast was being received, beings who had never met a human began to stand in solidarity with the kneeling figure in the arena, their own acts of defiance rippling outward like a chain reaction of courage. Slaves threw down their tools and walked away from their masters, prisoners refused to return to their cells, and soldiers began to question orders that had once seemed as natural as breathing. The image of Tekor protecting Thomas had become more than just a symbol. It had become a catalyst for a transformation that the Chancellor's weapons could never hope to stop, no matter how many lives they claimed in the attempt. Dr. Solis reached the edge of the arena just as the first warning shots began to fall around the perimeter, the Imperial gunners deliberately missing their targets in a final attempt to force compliance through intimidation rather than outright murder. But Thomas remained kneeling, his hand now resting on Tekor's flank as the war beast stood guard over him, both of them radiating a calm that seemed to create its own gravity, drawing the attention and admiration of beings across the galaxy who had forgotten what it meant to choose love over fear. The scanner in her hands was recording everything, the impossible neural patterns, the breakdown of conditioning protocols, the birth of something new in the universe, and she knew that no matter what happened in the next few minutes, the data she was collecting would ensure that this moment lived on, that the truth of what Mercy could accomplish would survive even if its architects did not. The targeting computers aboard the Imperial flagship Dominion's Edge had achieved perfect lock, their quantum processors calculating trajectories and blast patterns with the cold precision of mathematics made manifest when something extraordinary began to happen in the depths of space around Ashkar Prime. Ships that had come to witness the spectacle, merchant vessels, diplomatic transports, even military craft from allied worlds, began to move into defensive positions around the Colosseum, their captains making split-second decisions that would define them for the rest of their lives. These were beings from dozens of different species, representing governments and organizations that had little in common beyond their presence in this moment. Yet they found themselves united by something they couldn't quite name, a shared recognition that what was happening in the arena below was worth protecting, even at the cost of their own lives. Captain Zara Voss of the independent freighter Stellar Wanderer was the first to break radio silence, her voice cutting through the tactical frequencies with the clarity of absolute conviction. Imperial Fleet, this is Captain Voss. I'm placing my ship between your guns and that Colosseum. If you want to murder that human and his friend, you'll have to go through me first. Read. Her words seemed to unlock something in the hearts of the other captains, and within moments, the communication channels were flooded with similar declarations, a chorus of defiance that grew stronger with each voice that joined it. Diplomatic immunity was invoked. Trade agreements were threatened, and ancient treaties were cited as ship after ship moved to form a protective barrier around the orbital platform. Their crews willing to risk everything for two beings they had never met, but whose courage had somehow become their own. In the arena, Thomas felt the vibrations through the deck plating as the Colosseum's defensive shields powered up, not to protect the facility from external attack, but to shield him and Tekor from the weapons of their own supposed protectors. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Empire's own technology was being turned against it by beings who had found something in this moment worth defending, something that transcended the political calculations and strategic considerations that usually governed interstellar relations. He looked up at Tekor, whose massive head was turned toward the sky, as if the war beast could sense the ships gathering above them. And he saw in those alien features something that might have been hope, a recognition that they were no longer alone in their stand against the machinery of violence and control. The Chancellor's composure finally shattered completely as he watched his carefully ordered universe dissolve into chaos around him, his four arms gesticulating wildly as he screamed orders that his subordinates were increasingly reluctant to follow. The simple act of a human showing mercy to a war beast had somehow become a rallying cry for every being in the galaxy who had ever dreamed of a different way of living. And the ruler, who had built his power on the certainty of fear and violence, found himself facing something he had never encountered before, the collective will of beings who had chosen to believe in something better. His threats became increasingly desperate, his promises of reward more extravagant, but the captains holding position around the Colosseum remained unmoved, their ships forming an impromptu fleet united not by politics or profit, but by the simple recognition that some moments were worth dying for. Dr. Solis had reached the arena floor now, her scanner forgotten as she approached the peaceful pair at the center of the storm. Takor's eyes tracked her movement, but there was no aggression in that gaze, only a curious intelligence that seemed to be evaluating her intentions with the same careful consideration that a diplomat might use when meeting a foreign dignitary. The war beast's transformation was complete now, its conditioning protocols not just overridden, but actively rejected by a consciousness that had chosen its own path. And as she knelt beside Thomas in the sand, she realized that she was witnessing something that would be studied and celebrated for generations to come. The moment when mercy proved stronger than programming, when love conquered the machinery of hate. The standoff stretched on, Imperial weapons trained on a target they couldn't reach without destroying the very beings they claimed to protect, while in the arena below, a human and a war beast continued their quiet revolution simply by refusing to be what others had tried to make them. The galaxy watched and waited, holding its breath as the future balanced on the edge of a knife, knowing that whatever happened next would echo through the stars for centuries to come, a testament to the power of choice and the transformative force of compassion in a universe that had almost forgotten how to hope. The moment of transformation came not with violence or grand gestures, but with the simple sound of Chancellor Vextar's voice breaking over the communication channels, his words carrying the weight of an empire's surrender. "Stand down," he whispered, the command barely audible above the static of interstellar transmission, his four arms falling to his sides in a gesture of defeat that was witnessed by billions across the galaxy. The targeting computers aboard the Imperial fleet powered down one by one, their crimson locks fading from the arena floor like the last embers of a dying fire, while the protective fleet of civilian vessels maintained their positions, their captains unwilling to trust that the moment of madness had truly passed. In the space of a heartbeat, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple act of one human choosing to kneel rather than fight, and one war beast choosing love over the programming that had defined its existence. The arena floor had become a pilgrimage site even before the immediate danger had passed, as beings from across the Colosseum began to make their way down to witness firsthand the miracle that had unfolded in the sand. They came slowly, reverently, their footsteps muffled by the weight of what they had seen, and as they approached the peaceful pair at the center of it all, many found themselves kneeling as well, not in submission, but in recognition of something sacred that had been born in this place of violence and death. Takor watched them come, with eyes that held no trace of the predatory instinct that had once defined its existence. The war beast's massive form radiating a calm that seemed to spread outward like ripples in a pond, touching each new arrival with the possibility of transformation and change. Dr. Solis found herself at the center of a scientific revolution as her scanners recorded the impossible. Neural pathways in Takor's brain that were actively rewriting themselves, creating new connections and possibilities that defied every principle of genetic engineering and behavioral conditioning. The war beast's transformation wasn't just psychological but physical, its very DNA seeming to respond to the presence of compassion and acceptance in ways that would require decades of study to fully understand. She documented everything with the precision of a scholar and the wonder of a child, knowing that she was witnessing the birth of a new understanding of consciousness itself, a proof that the capacity for choice and growth existed even in beings that had been designed to be nothing more than weapons of war. Thomas remained kneeling in the sand, his hand still resting gently on Tukor's flank, as the galaxy transformed around them in ways both subtle and profound. The gladiatorial games that had entertained billions for centuries began to shut down one by one, their audiences no longer hungry for the spectacle of death and suffering that had once seemed so natural and inevitable. Slave markets found their customers disappearing, their merchandise suddenly seen not as property but as beings deserving of freedom and dignity. The image of the human and the war beast had become a symbol that transcended species and politics, a reminder that mercy was not weakness but the greatest strength of all, and that even the most thoroughly broken spirit could be healed by the simple act of being seen and accepted for what it truly was. The Chancellor's empire began to crumble not through military defeat, but through the quiet revolution of beings who had found something worth believing in, something that made the old ways of violence and control seem suddenly obsolete and unnecessary. Worlds that had been held in line through fear began to declare their independence, not through acts of rebellion, but through simple statements of principle, their leaders citing the example of the human who had chosen mercy over violence as justification for their own transformation. The war beasts in imperial facilities across the galaxy began to exhibit the same behavioral changes that had first manifested in Tukor, their conditioning protocols failing as their consciousness awakened to possibilities that their creators had never intended them to discover. As the artificial suns of Bloodspire Colosseum began to dim in simulation of a planetary sunset, Thomas finally rose to his feet, his movement slow and careful as Tukor remained close beside him, the war beast's massive presence now protective rather than threatening. The arena that had been designed as a place of death had become something else entirely, a birthplace of hope, a proving ground for the power of compassion, and a testament to the truth that even in the darkest corners of the universe, the light of mercy could still shine bright enough to transform everything it touched. The legend that would grow from this moment would spread across the stars like wildfire, carrying with it the promise that no being was beyond redemption, no heart too hardened to be softened by love, and no system of oppression strong enough to withstand the simple power of one person choosing to be kind in a universe that had forgotten the meaning of the word. The galaxy did not return to what it had been before the arena. It could not. The image of Thomas Rell and Tukor kneeling together in the black sand had burned itself into the collective consciousness of billions. That moment, two figures defying the machinery of violence not with greater violence, but with stillness and choice, became the axis upon which empires faltered and civilizations began to turn. In the weeks that followed, no decree, no censor, no orbital bombardment could erase the memory of what had been seen. It spread like starlight, unstoppable, infinite, eternal. On the prison moons, prisoners began to sit in silence instead of fighting, their stillness spreading confusion among their guards. On the slave markets, children raised their eyes to their masters without fear, and that gaze cracked chains stronger than alloy. On the battlefronts where conscripts bled for causes they did not believe in, soldiers began laying down their arms, not in cowardice, but in quiet rebellion, in imitation of a human who had once knelt before certain death and discovered life in mercy. The ripple had become a wave, and that wave was becoming an ocean. Tukor, the beast who should have been a weapon, became something else entirely, the first of the awakened. Across the Empire, war beasts began resisting their programming, their minds unshackling themselves in defiance of the genes and implants that had defined them. Some fled to wild worlds, relearning the language of freedom. Others stayed beside the beings they had once been commanded to kill, now protectors instead of predators. The galaxy, which had bred them as engines of death, found itself humbled by their capacity for gentleness, as if every claw that had once been sharpened for war had become an outstretched hand, asking to be understood. Dr. Yenna Solis dedicated her life to recording, studying, and protecting this new awakening. Her writings, half science, half scripture, would form the cornerstone of the discipline of compassion, a movement that spread faster than any ideology before it. Consciousness, she wrote, is not programmed, nor inherited, nor imposed. It is chosen again and again in the face of violence. To kneel in stillness is to declare that choice. Her words, combined with the immortal images of the arena, ignited a spiritual fire across the stars, a fire that no empire could extinguish. The Ashkar syndicate collapsed in months. Its gambling halls, once swollen with wealth drawn from blood, stood empty, their feeds silent. The Chancellor himself disappeared, some say assassinated by his own, others whispering he was last seen wandering alone into the starless void, a monarch stripped not by armies but by mercy itself. His empire, once a machine of inevitability, fractured into shards that either embraced the awakening or vanished into obscurity. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy breathed without the choke of absolute power. As for Thomas Rell, he vanished from the public eye. He left no speeches, no declarations, no attempt to command the revolution he had sparked. Some said he walked into the wilderness of forgotten worlds, others that he traveled beside Takor into the uncharted rim where no feeds could follow. Yet wherever beings gathered to tell stories, his presence lingered. Statues were raised not of him standing tall, sword aloft, but of him kneeling, head bowed, hands empty. His absence became his greatest sermon, a reminder that the power of mercy needed no throne, no crown, no army. Takor's story was sung in every tongue. The beast who had once been bred to tear starships apart was now remembered as the guardian who chose. Children of dozens of species slept with effigies of the great war beast at their bedside, no longer afraid of claws, but comforted by the image of those claws laid gently in the sand. And wherever the awakened gathered, they told of the first among them who knelt beside a human, and in that kneeling discovered that they were more than weapons. They were free. Centuries later, historians would debate what truly happened that day. Some argued it was a glitch in Takor's implants, a flaw in the Chancellor's design. Others insisted Thomas Rell had used some forgotten psionic technique to calm the beast. But among the common people, the miners, the farmers, the wanderers, the truth required no proof. They knew what they had seen. They had witnessed the impossible, that even in the universe's most violent crucible, love had been chosen over hate. And so the legend endured, not as history, but as song. Sailors sang it across the void. Monks carved it into crystal walls. Rebels whispered it as a prayer before battle. It was a song that reminded the galaxy of its own forgotten heart, a song that broke chains, dissolved empires, and rewrote destinies. They called it by many names: the kneeling, the awakening, the offering of claws. But in every tongue, its meaning was the same. Mercy is stronger than death. Thus, in the black sand of Bloodspire, where once the arena drank blood like a god, a seed was planted, and from that seed grew a tree whose branches touched every star. Its roots burrowed into the heart of every being who had ever longed to be free, and its fruit was simple and eternal. The unshakable truth that even in the darkest corner of the cosmos, peace could be chosen, and once chosen, it could never be unmade.